Happy to see you here. Welcome to our discussion on comprehending comprehension with conversations with Trina and Doug. I will allow them to take it away from here, but I will be the background person. If you have any questions in the chat, I will help relay those as we're going through this conversation. Please feel free to be as active as you would like and as you can. It makes us a lot more fun for all of us participating. So, further ado, I will hand it over to Trina and Doug.
Yeah, good evening. Hopefully you guys are all ready to be brave and engage us in a debate, right? That's what comprehending comprehensions is really about. We wanted to hold something really authentic, a live audience, interactive conversation about some prickly topics. So that's our goal tonight.
That's right. And this is definitely unscripted. So know that we're not going to be running through a bunch of slides or talking to you. We're going to have a conversation. And it's for anyone interested in having this conversation. Please post things in the chat. Please talk to us. Turn off your microphone. We're really excited about conversing with you.
All right, so the way this goes is Doug and I post some questions, and sometimes the questions are to each other, and sometimes they're to you guys, right? And then we just roll. We just roll and see where the conversation goes. So if there's something you're really interested in talking about, speak up. Otherwise, Doug and I will sit there and, ask each other questions and debate. And if you don't know us already, this is how Doug and I got started. Right? We became friends over talking about all these controversial things that really has made our relationship and our research and our work so much better. I do want to mention a couple housekeeping items. Doug and I are both affiliated with Language Dynamics Group, which is the company that sponsors this event. And this is, of course, at our doing because we're like, no, we are not just about the things, the tools and the things that we do for educators. We're really about how we can apply the science. So we want to have sciencey conversations that lead to real applications in classrooms. Christy, Megan, and Cameron are also from Language Dynamics Group, and they're here just to help us out, play support. All right. Doug, do you have something to say?
All right. Let me think. So we are affiliated with Language Dynamics Group. And Trina and I also have a few assessments and interventions that are connected through that research dissemination and implementation company, and they are very relevant to comprehension.
So Doug is a professor and the Maggie Dick Scarlett Chair in Speech Language Pathology at the University of Wyoming in the Department of Communication Disorders.
And my very dear friend Trina is a professor at the University of Kansas and the director of Juniper Gardens Children's Project. And just so y'all know, this conversation will be audio and video recorded so that it's made available to others at a later time. So thank you all for joining us.
Okay, I'm going to start us off with, let's get clear about what comprehension really is. Does everybody feel like you have a full understanding of comprehension and what it is? Because I don't. And that's part of the reason why we had this conversation. So, Doug, I'm going to let you start us off. What is comprehension? And is it a skill that you can teach?
Yeah, I love it. We're really getting this a lot from our very dear friend Hugh Katz, who is reminding us that comprehension is not a single unitary construct. It's not a single thing. Just like reading fluency is not a single thing. It's an outcome. It's the effect or result of multiple things. And so comprehension is the same idea, right? And so when we talk about comprehension, first of all, we're talking about what kind of comprehension are we talking about, Trina? We're talking about reading comprehension or language comprehension?
Ooh, you see, I was intentional not to specify.
You're trying to trick me already.
Because I'm not sure there's a difference.
Oh my gosh. Is this how this is going to start? I like that. Okay. Hey, that's really good.
Okay, I have a follow-up question, Doug. Why do we treat comprehension, or why is it so often treated like a skill that you can teach? Like, where did we go wrong? Like, if it's like this product of, and it's multidimensional.
Right. Well, there was an absolutely amazing systematic review that was funded by the government in 2000, right? The National Reading Panel. And they simply organized research studies according to particular domains. And two of those domains were vocabulary and comprehension, right? I think those are the two categories. That
Two of
was
the 5 categories.
two of
Everybody
the
knows
five.
like the big five, right?
Oh my gosh. Then it turned into like the five pillars and the big five, and it's absolutely nonsensical. I mean, it made sense to organize the data that way for the systematic review, but it just makes no sense to say, oh yeah, we need to focus on vocabulary and on comprehension. How can that make sense to anyone when vocabulary is just simply one of the strands that builds to comprehension? So there's a bit of a problem right there, thinking that comprehension is a single thing or this entity that you focus on in separation from other language skills or what have you. So I think maybe that's where we started to go wrong or go down the path that was maybe a little, I don't know,
Yeah.
off kilter. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Oh, well, if I believe the simple view of reading formula, right, it's word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension, which makes reading comprehension a product, right?
Mm.
It's the outcome of all of this other stuff that needs to be intertwined and woven together. So I think it's helpful to think that. At least that helps me think of it appropriately, like that's my goal. Is my goal is to help kids to be able to comprehend what they read, but to but I don't start over there. I take a step back and see what I need to develop or what I need to, like teach or enhance so that kids are successful there. All
You're not
right.
starting with the outcome. Got you. You're starting at what builds to the outcome. You're not trying to make a coat out of many colors with a single thread. How would that ever be enough?
Right. Right. I also, that was a really good metaphor, Doug. Kind of cheesy, but I'm gonna let you go with that. What- Well, what
Oh
I
my.
was thinking, you said something about the development, and actually that's exactly the reason why I want to see reading comprehension as the product, is because that means we can teach it and the skills necessary for it long before they're going to need reading comprehension, right? We can work on oral language skills that build towards that language comprehension and the word recognition, and that happens long before they're actually comprehending what they read.
Early
Anyway.
intervention. So wait, can we just back up just one step even further, just for a moment? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Uh, everybody's pretty devastated with the results of the NAEP 2024, right? This National Assessment of Education Progress. And I know that people were thinking, well, with this application of our new focus on explicit systematic phonics instruction, then we should make gains here on students' reading comprehension. And that makes some sense, right? Because those are, I should say, some of the components necessary for reading comprehension. You absolutely have to have word recognition in place. But it cannot possibly be a surprise to us that if you are primarily focusing on just some of the threads, some of the strands, and ignoring other strands, then it's not going to be enough. It is a multiplicative, it is a product, right? This word recognition and language comprehension together yield reading comprehension. And so even if you're the most amazing fluent reader on the planet, as far as like word recognition goes, if you do not have the language to understand it, you'll be at zero because it's a multiplication factor, right? So, I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss people's feelings about the NAEP and about how since 1992 we've hardly made any progress at all. We just simply cannot be surprised at that until we focus on all of the strands. And I think maybe we're even talking about strands or components that Duke and Cartwright have introduced to us in like 2021, 2023. Time flies, but there's a lot
Right. So
there.
so I'm curious. I want to pose this question to the group, right? We haven't heard from them yet. And I hope somebody's brave enough to talk to us, okay? And don't worry about it. We only criticize each other. We're going to be nice to you guys. Um, I'm curious, what interested you in this topic, this idea about knowledge or learning, right? That's kind of where I think Doug was going to go a little bit, and I'm like holding him back just a teeny bit. I want to hear what interests you. Like, why are you here today? What's going on where you are at? What kind of professional role do you have? Tell us what's happening. He just let go. The NAEP results are disappointing to many. I'm curious if that's happening with you guys. Come on.
Chat, at least chat, throw stuff in the chat.
Or Naomi, just unmute and say something.
So it's a juxtaposition. I have worked with so many students who have so much knowledge, so much background knowledge, and they struggle to learn. And then I have other students who, and we treat learning as like this top down teacher to the student, and we do not empower students to use metacognition or teach them how to use metacognition, to teach them to use schema related to their own learning.
Did she just say all of my favorite button words?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, Naomi, you did it. That was really, really good. Okay, I'm gonna I'm not sure what I'm gonna do, but I want to talk about that.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, there is. I was like, where do I start? Knowledge. Let's start with knowledge. What do we mean by knowledge? Anybody have a very clear understanding or definition of what we mean by knowledge?
Well, I'm going to chime in. I like your hat, Doug.
Thank you. It came from Guatemala. I love it.
So, I'm sorry I came in late, raced home from work, but so I don't know what you said in the 8 minutes that I was not here, but in terms
Doug was talking, it wasn't important.
Okay, in terms of reading comprehension, there's a lot of talk about knowledge. Yes, it's the upper strands of the rope, blah, 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 blah. And I like your question, what is knowledge? Because that's something that's kind of been haunting me is, as a speech language person, how can you talk about knowledge without talking about language? Because how can you process knowledge unless you can process language? How can you express your knowledge unless you can express yourself verbally, of course, in writing, etc. I just see such I see it so well integrated with language, and yet when I hear other people who are smarter than I am and definitely doing many more workshops than I'm doing, I don't hear them talk about, I don't hear the word language in there. Yeah. I will say I did hear one of those people speak a couple of days ago, and she did use the word syntax. When she was talking about knowledge, she actually mentioned the word syntax, and I'm like, hallelujah. Like, okay, that's a language area. Yeah. And I think, and just one other point I want to make is that I think it's confusing people, because people think that they can just, and of course I do special ed, so I work with kids with language disabilities. And so I think just by using the word knowledge and not talking about some of the language skills that fall within that knowledge domain, people think that they can just show a video and provide background knowledge, or they can, provide some maybe vocabulary terms or show a map or something like that. So I'm seeing a lot of misunderstanding around this use of the word knowledge. And I know it's showing up in a lot of different reading programs that are now being recommended. I'll leave it at that. I could go on.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. I just threw up this slide, not so that this is not necessarily anything you need to commit to memory or anything, just simply that there are many different types of knowledge in the literature, and people have defined them very, very differently, right? So, and look, vocabulary knowledge is one of them. And you mentioned like syntax knowledge. Doug and I were meeting earlier, and we were talking about like cohesion and organization. All of those things are actually knowledge, or could be considered knowledge, that are 100% dependent on language. There's such a conflation there. And I also want to say one of the reasons, at least Doug and I think that one of the reasons why there's this idea that knowledge is like this magical thing, right, that takes care of everything, is because we're getting a lot of our information from journalists. And in a journalist's, their job is to simplify the narrative so it's understood by the masses. I'm sure you guys are reading People, right? Emily Hanford did a fabulous job with Sold a Story, but it was a very narrow story, right? But if you go with that way, all you're focused on is like de-implementing 3Qing. That was the message, right? And if you go with maybe The Knowledge Gap by Natalie Wexler, I read that book. She didn't mention language at all, right? She just said, knowledge is the answer. Just do knowledge. That's what you need. That's the message that it gets distilled to from a journalist, right? So Karen's 100% right that we're misunderstanding what we mean by knowledge and whether what it all entails.
And it requires, the way that knowledge is conveyed in the education system is through language most of the time. And it's certainly conveyed in written language, in books. And that is how a lot of knowledge is acquired, is through written language. Language. I don't need to say written language. It doesn't need the adjective. It doesn't need the adjective. I'm sorry. I know that people get very angry about that, but it's true. It is just conveyed in language. Sometimes it's written down, sometimes it isn't, whatever. It's still processed through Wernicke's.
Oh, sorry. Keep going, Doug.
No. So it's just that, okay, we aren't asking the question about what is necessary to help children become good reading comprehenders, like to encourage and to facilitate reading comprehension. We are not asking the question, what do you need? We're not saying, oh my gosh, we have 60 to 80% of children below grade level on the NAEP assessment. What do they need? We already know what they need. We know that they need all of these different strands to focus on. You cannot boil it down and say, oh, well, what we need is knowledge. That makes for a great book. Or what we need is decoding, phonics. That makes for a great story. But that's not all that we need. It's just it's the title of this whole conversation is knowledge enough? No, of course not. Knowledge will never be enough. You could know everything in the entire universe and it still would not be enough because people create and are innovative and language is infinitely generative. And so you will never know everything that people create ever. So knowledge will never be enough. Okay.
I'm just going to throw up a slide just to make sure that everyone is clear that background knowledge is one of the strands of the upper strands, right? Vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge are also needed. And I don't know if I have this on a slide here, but I'm going to make it simpler. This one. So if we blow this up, what we're really talking about is content in a passage or a story. Then there are words, there are sentences, and I'm going to skip down to discourse. The verbal reasoning is the stuff that kind of glues them all together, right? So that section, the upper strands, are much more than just knowledge themselves. Okay.
So if you say, I really want to focus on background knowledge and vocabulary, that's kind of like a little buzz phrase nowadays. I don't know if y'all have heard that, like, oh yeah, I'm going to focus on vocabulary and background knowledge. If you say that, it blows my brain up because I'm like, well, that's great. Okay, but that's not enough. Why would you do that? Why would you focus on those things in isolation? For one thing, that's not even how language is acquired. You don't acquire language in isolation. You don't fractionalize the skills and then put them together. That's not how it works.
We've been talking theoretically a little bit, but do we have some research? Like there are some reviews on knowledge-rich curriculum and reviews on other things like strategies and self-regulation interventions. Like what's the difference? Like, are these things juxtaposed? Right? They seem to be in the literature. I'm just saying.
It's a good question.
So what's the research on these, Doug? Or does
Okay,
it feel
so look, we're supposed to all be about the science, right? The science of reading, but it's absolutely astonishing how many things get adopted before there's really even any research evidence behind them. They can be great ideas. They can be the most amazing ideas. Paula Talal had the most amazing ideas about things, but the ideas do not translate sometimes into reality. That's just how it goes. I mean, if you look at all of the systematic reviews and the studies that have been done on teaching children background knowledge, having a knowledge-rich curriculum, and that's your focus. And then you look at how well they do on reading comprehension assessments, the effect sizes are really, really small. Some of them are zero, and most
0
of them
to
are very small.
0.15? That's
Yeah.
not very large.
So I don't know why or how this idea that we need to focus on background knowledge, that's got to be the thread that we're in love with. I don't even know how that came about because there isn't even any research evidence to support it. I'm not saying that it won't potentially pan out. I'm just saying that right now, with all of the systematic reviews and meta-analyses out there, there's very little research evidence to support this kind of implementation across the whole world as though it is the panacea. I don't quite understand how that even happens in the education world when we are supposed to be following the science of reading. I'm not angry about background knowledge. I love it. I just don't understand how it becomes the primary focus when the research evidence does not support that.
Okay, so what does the research support, or what's an alternative to like knowledge-rich curricula?
Well, I can tell you this
Oof.
much. I mean, I can guarantee you this much. The research will support a focus on all of the strands and an integration of those strands. So if you ask me, what does the research tell you about strategy? It will not be enough. What does it say about focusing on syntax? It won't be enough. What does it say
And
about focusing on
vocabulary,
vocab? It won't be enough.
there's tons of reviews that say vocabulary instruction alone does not translate to reading comprehension gains, right? So here's some little data for you. Multi-component interventions, right, that include things like vocabulary, complex sentences, discourse structures, and knowledge, those have the greatest gains. So the largest effect size are remember it was like 0 to 0.15. We can get 0.52, 0.59 effect sizes with a multi-component intervention. Now, the next piece I want to ask about is like, what exactly is a strategy? Like, and do we need to have strategies? Because there's a lot of people. What was the post we heard, or somebody said, I know strategies are out,
Yeah.
right? It's
Oh,
like all
gosh.
of a sudden strategy instruction has lost favor. Okay. And the primary reason is because as the knowledge people were making their case, they were making strategies the straw man, right? I think that's at least my opinion, but I don't know. What about strategies? Do we need those? Is there, what do you guys think? I know Naomi's a little hesitant. I can see her face. She's
No.
like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Naomi.
No, I was just typing. I mean, we're teaching individuals. Kids do not fit in curriculum boxes or onto a strategy graphic organizer. And I'm in California, and I don't know if this is what's happening around the rest of the country, but what happens here is we have a shiny curriculum that's probably just version 34 of the last ones that they've launched. School district buys it, they come in, they train the teachers to teach, but they're not training the teachers to teach. The teachers never get the opportunity to teach individuals. Curriculum is a roadmap, strategy is a roadmap, but these are individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that was well said. That was well said.
Love that. And, you know, it could take us down a particular path. I don't know if we want to go down it, but I love it. And it is like, you know, they don't train teachers to teach. And I think there's
Oh,
something to that idea of, well, how do you
actually,
teach language? right? How do you, because we're talking about the strands, right? And we know how to teach word recognition. We understand explicit systematic phonics instruction, and we've got that pretty well set, like how to do it. How do you teach language? Is it by just exposing children to a lot of content and just filtering through lots of topics and learning content? Is that how you teach?
I wanted to say one thing is that so often we're training teachers to teach a curriculum, but we're not training them to teach children, right? Those are actually different skill sets. Being able to deliver this curriculum and actually use a curriculum to teach children, totally different things, right? I mean, this is kind of like the space in which I live in my research. And what was your question again, Doug? I was going to transition
Well,
there and I
I'm
forgot.
just kind of thinking about, a recent article by Katz and Kamai, and they were talking about, they're really advocating for this hybrid approach of literacy instruction embedded in content or background knowledge or building background knowledge, but with also this focus on literacy instruction. And what I guess I'm wondering, what does that look like? What do you mean? Do you mean systematic, explicit, diagnostic, cumulative language instruction, or those principles of instruction embedded into the lessons that have content? I mean, did you think that's what they're referring to?
I don't know. What do you guys think? Would that help if literacy instruction was integrated into content coursework? Yeah. I think that's especially feasible in third grade and up, right? But I think younger, that might be more difficult because the material that they're expected to learn conceptually from science and social studies is at a different level that they can decode, even though that could be done through read alouds or through oral language.
Well,
But
Trina, I mean, you're so versed in the science of teaching, right? The science of instruction. I mean, you go way back with Engelman
well, I'm
and
not that old.
okay. Okay, maybe you don't go that far back.
Yeah, maybe Engelman's son.
Okay,
Okay.
but if we embedded these principles of instruction, these principles of structured literacy actually that apply to all of the strands, if we embedded that across the whole day into everything, essentially just good teaching, because Naomi, you were saying that we need to train teachers how to teach, like the science of teaching, the science of instruction, then that could go a long ways, right, into making the background knowledge actually something useful. Because what will happen is you need active responding if you're going to do evidence-based teaching, right? And so then that means they're not just listening to a story about Columbus or whatever you choose. They're actually learning how to engage to produce that language as well.
Okay. I'm so with you, Doug, but I really want to ask this question. I really want somebody to answer this question. Okay, I'm formulating it. Okay. Are teachers supposed to be teaching knowledge? Okay. Is the job of education to impart knowledge and get kids to acquire knowledge, or is it to teach them how to acquire knowledge independently? Okay, just see. What I'm asking is knowledge versus learning. I'm asking that question. Is our job as educators to impart knowledge or to teach children how to learn themselves? Okay, yeah, unmute. Let's hear you.
Both. Like Sophie. Sophie's like, yes, that's the answer. Yes.
Okay. All right, then the next question is, can we get knowledge for free if we teach how to acquire it using content that they need to know?
Wait, say that one more time.
Okay, can we get the knowledge part? Remember the first half of my question. Can we get that kind of for free if our primary aim is at teaching children how to acquire the knowledge independently, but the material that we're using contains knowledge? Are you seeing the difference, or am I like splitting hairs, people? What I'm saying, okay, go ahead, Anna Rose. Anna Rose.
So I think you're going to get, of course it's both, but you're going to get hugely different outcomes there. And if you can teach the skill of how to learn to a kid, and they can take that across the environment of their life, wherever they go, their outcomes are going to be enormously more diverse and powerful than anything we can replicate in a school environment.
That was so well said. That was
It's-
so well said. I'm so glad that we've got that on audio.
It's beautiful. And the amazing thing about the science of teaching, especially when it comes to language, is that we know that you do it with content, that it has to be contextualized. That's the way that you teach language. And so I don't know, Trina. I think, okay, I'm just trying to think more about your question, Trina. I feel like the answer is yes, of course. And what happens is that it's an inevitable yes. If you are using evidence-based language instruction, it has to be both, because you are teaching strategies and so forth in content, in the context. So they are inseparable. That is what makes contextualized language intervention meaningful, because you're teaching them language in a meaningful communication context. That's
Okay, so someone in the chat, I think Oifi McNamara. Okay, she says that children with learning disabilities might be an exception to that. And I'm like, I've worked with kids with disabilities my whole life. And one of my favorite things is to, what's the right word? Defy expectations. And I punched through all those low expectations for these kids. And that is exactly what I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story. When I was a clinician in New York City, okay, I was working with kids with autism with some pretty significant disabilities, but still, bright enough to be able to learn to read. Got fourth graders in front of me, and I'm trying to, support their reading. Turns out they were word callers. They had only been taught by sight words. Okay. Sight words, sight words, sight words. But this kid is totally verbal and actually knows all the letter names and letter sounds, but doesn't know how to read that way. Right? Doesn't know how to read phonetically because he was taught by like flashcards. Let me tell you, when that hit me, I was like, here's this fourth grader. We just wasted 5 years of his instruction teaching him as if he doesn't have the ability to be able to learn to read phonetically, right? And we basically impeded his ability to learn on his own and to apply a repertoire, a metalinguistic repertoire when he needed it, right? And then once I figured that out, this was in my internship. Once I figured that out, I saw that everywhere. I saw it everywhere. Kids, super low expectations, people just, giving them the words, giving them the words. I mean, Edmark curriculum is all about sight, 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 sight. And I was flabbergasted because I could actually teach these kids to read phonetically, which is what I did. I turned it around and said, well, heck no, forget everything you just learned. I'm going to teach you this way. And they would learn it. They could learn it. And they would get so excited because they had the skills to apply when there was a new word, a new problem. So I do think that they're going to need some more support, and it's going to take some more time to develop those. And, every kid is going to be different, right? But I would warn against underestimating them.
I love that. And I wanted to add what you just added, actually, was that you don't want to ignore the fact that it could be harder. It could take more time, greater intensity. Trina and I have both worked in the field long enough, and we worked with a lot of children with disabilities. And so we're not trying to ignore that fact, right? That children need additional dosages and additional supports. There's no question about that. but the evidence-based approaches, those apply to those particular children also. Yeah, I wanted to clarify that, which you already did. I didn't need.
Yeah, and of course that is the case. But I mean, it was Anna Rosa who really said it. She's like, we're gonna have greater outcomes if we can teach them to learn on their own. I mean, and that's what we're really about, right? Trying to infuse the love of learning and the love of reading. That's gonna have exponential benefits that we can't give them in their 12 years in school. No? Anyway, all right. I am enjoying
I
your
also,
comments.
sorry,
Go ahead.
sorry
Go
to
ahead.
interrupt.
No.
I also think that with the read road, it does depend on the age of the child. So in my mind, yes, we require all those different aspects and different strands, but some strands are thicker than others at different points in time. So for a very young child who's only just learning to read, PA is going to be one of the thicker strands. We need to really focus on that whilst building knowledge. But in terms of getting them to, predict and to infer, that might be something more simplistic, so more like a thinner strand. So it's almost like you need the ingredients to bake a cake, but in different amounts for each different child.
Yeah, Jane, I like that. And I like that because I want to, at least I like it if I take it in this particular direction, which is this idea that it is cumulative and it is systematic. And the instruction that we need to provide needs to look like that also. And it's like that in the real world too, right? Like 2-year-olds do not speak like 3-year-olds, and there is a difference. And it is systematic and it is cumulative over time. And so our instruction needs to look like that also. And it's true, you build the foundation and then you build up from there. That's crucial. So I'm totally with you there. Now, I would not say, oh, well, you've got to build this word recognition, phonics foundation first, and then you can start adding in language. That I feel like is a disastrous idea because you can absolutely teach and build complex academic language with 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds while even actually before you're focusing on word recognition. But I don't think that's what you're saying, Jane. I think you're saying some of the strands build to other strands as you move along. Now, that may not be so true with language as it is with word recognition, because you are building syntax and vocabulary, right, at the same time simultaneously, I think. But yeah, for the most part, I'm with you.
Also, like the lower strands are constrained skills, meaning that their developmental period is more constrained in certain years, from like preschool to like first grade. That's generally when the phonological awareness, alphabet knowledge, phonics, and fluent word reading happens, but language is unconstrained. That's developing all the time. And as a matter of fact, language develops the most rapid in kindergarten and first grade. Preschool, kindergarten, and first grade, they acquire the most language during those times. And so we do some work internationally too, and I find that there's a misunderstanding that educators across the globe have been told, no, focus on word recognition during K2, and then when they're in third, fourth, and fifth grade, then you can focus on comprehension. Well, that is like global. It's a global misnomer. So it's dangerous to wait because there's that unconstrained language development that happens, and teachers absolutely can facilitate a more rapid acquisition in those early years at the same time as their phonological skills are developing. And it is also necessary that they have sufficient language abilities, because phonological is still language, it's the phonological aspects of language, that they have to have things like vocabulary, some sentence construction in order to even learn the phonological skills. So if they don't have language from the beginning, they're not going to learn those PA skills either. And
Okay,
my own research tells us that as well.
absolutely. And Jennifer's got a question for us. So she says, I'm currently discussing with my district that we cannot just teach phonics and ignore language. They continue to believe that they need to teach them how to read before they need to worry about comprehension. That's not a question, but that's a comment, and I think we should talk about it for a second. So, Trina, what you just mentioned to us is this idea that it should be simultaneous. Now, make the case, because somebody will say this, and this is like a little mantra that goes throughout the science of reading community all the time. Children cannot understand what they cannot decode. Right? They love saying that, right?
No, that's like wrong. It's
They
really
love
people
it.
say that.
Or they'll say, if your student is having difficulty reading comprehension, then go back to fluency. They got a little chart. And then
Yeah.
if you're having, oh my gosh. And
No,
I'm
no,
not saying
no,
that's
no.
wrong. I'm just saying that's incomplete.
Yeah. So I would probably phrase it like this. Working on oral language, this really critical constellation of oral language skills, which is vocabulary, sentences, and discourse structures. And then with those three things, you can acquire background knowledge and use your you use your inferential thinking to acquire background knowledge. But if you do not have words, sentences, and discourse understanding, you cannot use your inferential thinking to acquire background knowledge. And without those things, you also cannot acquire phonological metalinguistic skills, right? So those are absolutely critical. And comprehension is a language skill, right? Anyway,
So,
I forgot what your question
Anna,
was. That happens to me all the time.
well, Anna's got a question. I think
Okay.
yeah, I know it is. So you're saying that you focus on PA in the younger years, while still allowing informal immersion in the upper strands, then flip this in the upper years.
I'm not saying that.
Right. The thing is that there's room for focus on both in the younger years. Of course, you focus on PA, but not exclusively, by the way, on PA. Remember, it's not just about one strand. And evidence-based phonics instruction is synthetic. You're blending things as quickly as you can, right? The synthesis of it. And so, yes, you do that very early on, as early as you can, while at the same time, I should be careful, not at the exact same time, but I mean in the same
Oh
day.
yeah. What you mean is like in those early years is you have a phonics lesson and you have a separate language comprehension or language lesson. Those are separate in early years, but those things come together in reading comprehension at a later time. And
Yeah.
but tell me, why? Why do they have to be separate and not use the same text for comprehension and for phonics in those early grades?
Because curriculum companies make more money that way.
No,
You're limiting their language growth. But
yes.
Yeah.
Who's saying that? Jack?
Oh,
Jacqueline?
yes.
Jacqueline.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, because the difficulty of the language when it's written is so small and not at the level that their listening comprehension is and their oral vocabularies, right? It's not until their phonics skills catch up to their language comprehension abilities that you can then put them together, right? So this idea of using decodable books for vocabulary and comprehension, no, that's not what they're for. Decodable books take all that complex language out of it so you can focus on the code. But they still need all this complex oral language exposure, which is why read alouds and other kind of explicit, systematic kind of approaches, like maybe storytelling, would be appropriate, because then they get exposed to all this complex oral language divided from having to sound out those words, right? That's really, really, really important.
So to be clear with Anna's question, you don't really agree with the first part of it where you focus on PA while allowing for informal immersion in the upper strands. You can be strategic, explicit, systematic, diagnostic, cumulative with language with a 2-year-old, right? But then she says in the second part of her question is then flip this in the upper years. And that actually, I think, is true, because it is decoding.
It's constrained, it's done, it's accomplished.
once you are able to access the code, you do not continue to improve too much on your ability to access the code. You can do it. And then thereafter, it is all about building the infinite complexities of language. There is no ceiling for language complexity. Well, there might be for my brain, but in hypothetically anyways, there's no ceiling there. So yes, you continue to build your language until you can speak in the most incredibly complex language that we've ever produced, if you ever got that far.
I want to
So-
make one point that is germane to our topic today, is that if we don't focus on word, sentence, discourse structures, and facilitate the use of verbal reasoning to obtain knowledge, then we miss the opportunity to teach children how to learn. We miss the opportunity for that learning to develop in those early years. They absolutely need those language strands to be able to even attack like comprehension when they're reading, right? So once they've got their phonics put together, they need to be able to merge that with all of those other oral language skills and that learning repertoire that also includes schemas. I wanted to go back to the comment Naomi made, but I don't know that I'm going to be able to. But schemas are actually very, very important for learning how to learn, right? But if we over rely on schemas, then we get this all or nothing view. Like it's got to be knowledge versus strategies, right? Or skills versus this, right? It's the beauty and the ugly of schemas, right? We can be very strategic in the way we teach those strategies. Schema is a type of a strategy. And if we do it, systematically, explicitly, and diagnostically, then we're going to be a lot better off. But these are not easy things to do, right?
So
It's certainly
would
much
the-
easier to sell a book if you've got one thing that a teacher's got to do.
Right. So what would it look like? Okay, so yes, background knowledge is absolutely an important thing to have. And it absolutely helps us with comprehension. There's no doubt about it. It's not enough, but it is there. So let's say that you're in a district and you've adopted a curriculum that focuses a lot on background knowledge. You spend 90 minutes talking about topics and but you're not applying or you're not having the students engage themselves in producing complex syntax or vocab or whatever it is. So what do you do about that? How do we take this super hyper focus on background knowledge and integrate all of the language strands into it?
I think you're asking the group, right?
I'm asking anybody.
Well, because you already know that I'm like, I got it. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Thematic instruction.
Say it again.
Thematic instruction.
Okay, say more. What do you do in a
So,
thematic instruction?
yeah, so if you're teaching a group of fourth graders about, oh gosh, I'm trying to think about mammals. And then you create a lot of interest, and the entry point is the interest. And then you can work on reading and vocabulary and morphology and understanding within words that relate to that topic that you're building background knowledge on. And then you can work on written expression using those same words and ideas that you're using in your main unit. I don't think I'm explaining that very clearly, but anchoring, rather than having a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here, pull it together, reduce the cognitive load, make it a richer experience, incorporate all of the elements.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I'm just going to summarize. It's like deepen the knowledge while working on all those strands and wrapping it around that activity, right? So if there's more practice for them to apply those the word, sentence, and discourse patterns that they're learning, and then using their verbal reasoning, they're going to create and consolidate that knowledge. Yeah.
And
No,
so
can I add to that? Is it
Please
okay if
do.
I take it real quick? I think I love this idea of putting things in context because, teaching all of these things in isolation is just such a slower pace. And I'm seeing this in real time with my 2.5-year-old. This small little toddler who is bursting to want to know how to communicate all these raging emotions that she has. And over the last few months, I've tried to work with her on just telling stories, retelling some of the books we're reading or talking about her favorite movie. And suddenly, at 2.5 years old, if something happens to her and she's emotional and she's having a hard time expressing herself, I'll say, wait, can you tell me a story about what just happened? And suddenly there's this vocabulary, there's this background knowledge that's coming through because of all of this practice we've had. And it's not that I've sat down and say, okay, let's talk about inferencing. You don't do that. It's this context, putting everything in context without having to explicitly say these are the skills we're working on, because kids are so absorbent. They're sponges to this stuff. And the context makes the difference.
Great. Thanks, Christy. And I'm sure you all know, but like you can remember and you acquire knowledge about something 22 times better when it's in a storytelling format versus like a list of information. Like you cannot remember those things. So if we were to teach things like social studies and science content using storytelling as the schema that kind of holds it all together and gives all that integrated practice, because you can't tell a story without doing words, sentences, and discourse, plus inferencing, it's just putting that knowledge in an organized schema so that they are practicing all of it. Very well said.
Janet is recommending contextualized language intervention. And I mean, I think that recommendation, I like that recommendation because there's a lot of research evidence behind that recommendation. And so I guess if we could just go back, could we just go back to the NAEP for just a brief moment? I'm sorry, I know that people are probably tired of talking about the NAEP, but okay, so I mean, so we have so many children who are not reading at a proficient level. Yes, you could potentially blame the test, but let's say for the sake of argument for a moment here, that the test is actually achievable, that you actually could understand the content that you're reading in the test. Okay, so you have so many children who are struggling with this particular assessment. And it's not just the NAEP, by the way, it's state assessments as well. You have really low performance on these assessments that measure reading comprehension. If we are applying systematic and explicit phonics instruction and our children are learning how to read fluently and they're doing a good job of it, and we even have data on the NAEP assessment that a lot of children do read with 90 to 95% accuracy on that test, that points to the other strand. I think this conversation is about how much do we actually believe the simple view of reading, Scarborough's rope, Duke and Cartwright's active view. How much do we actually believe that those models will yield reading comprehension? Because if we literally, truly, and I don't mean to talk about a theory or heuristics as though they're a belief, but to what extent do they have research evidence behind them? And to what extent do we believe that research? And if that research is completely supported by a lot of sound studies and so forth, then it's going to point you in the direction of the language comprehension strands, plural, right? Plural. And it's all about, just like Janet said, contextualized language intervention, which embeds all of those strands and integrates all of those strands into a meaningful context. I mean, am I going down the right path? I feel like we don't have a question about what the solution is. It's like the question is, why are we not
No, I think
applying
the question is, how can we make the solution doable for teachers?
There you go.
Right? Science, we know this. We've been talking about these strands, but theory does not translate to practice unless we've got the right combination of tools, right? They've got to be feasible. Now, I'm gonna kind of read a quote that I wanted to punctuate what Doug just said, and then let's talk about like what do teachers need, because we'll have 5 minutes. You guys can say, give us this. This is what we need. All right. Some of you are teachers, some of you are SLPs. But here's my punctuated quote. It's in reference to the complexity of defining reading comprehension. So reading comprehension is a complex ability, and it requires many years to develop. And comprehension instruction should reflect this complexity and length of instruction needed. Okay. So we can't just jump into comprehension, reading comprehension in 4th grade. Otherwise we get a slump, right? Somebody mentioned that it was in one of the things. We've known about that for decades. And we have to address it complexly, right? It is a complex solution, but we don't have to make it complex for the people who have to implement it. So now I want to hear, is all right? I want to know what are the solutions? Give us your ideas. How do we make this doable for teachers and SLPs and psychologists? How do we make this doable? Maybe it wasn't the right question. Wasn't that the question?
I think it's
I don't have a solution, but I have another problem that I can share with you. I think it's difficult because when we talk about, you know, using content to build like learning skills and background knowledge and things like that, it's what content do we prioritize? And it's going to look so different in so many different contexts, to different cultures, different groups of people. And I think that's a big problem, is we can't, even one class of children, you can't assume that they all have the same cultural backgrounds, even if they live in the same area. It's so vast and so different where they're coming from. So to even try and think of a program for a class, one class alone, needs to be so diverse. And I think that's one of the real challenges that I can see.
Yeah, I love that, Sophie. And I think that it really draws attention to this need that we have to focus on teaching children to learn how to learn, because we will never be able to teach them all of the content that's out there. They will never acquire all the knowledge possible. And we will never get it right either. There are microcultures of different knowledge that children need. So it's got to be about teaching knowledge and then teaching those children how to apply their knowledge to acquire new knowledge, right? That's got to be crucial. It's almost like the content maybe doesn't matter so much. It's about just using the content to build onto new content. That's what you focus on.
I think it's a really great point, but I also, Naomi mentioned something too. It's about engaging them and getting them motivated. And then you can, in like something like storytelling, it's easy enough to pivot to the things that they are interested in, right? So then you bring in their different cultures, their different interests, all the other things that they're motivated to talk about and to learn. And really, that's what we need. You know, I have 2 kids in college, and they complain. They're like, why am I relearning all the things that I was taught in high school? I'm like, I'm tired of this content. I want to learn what I'm interested in rather than the same old thing, right? So it reduces motivation when we're directing what they learn. We need to build the capacity for them to direct their own learning based on interest and motivation, but give them the skills and the learning, what am I mean? Like the language skills in there, and foster that acquisition of knowledge independently.
Okay, well, and it looks like the response to your question almost unanimously is that what teachers need is a way to teach language. So you better get to work, Trina, because they are not comfortable teaching language. They don't have the background. They don't have the education that a speech language pathologist has in general about language, and it's complex to them. And so we need to make it something that they can feasibly teach. It's not going to be hard, by the way, for the kids to learn language, even the children with language disorder. When you, I shouldn't say it that way. What I mean is, it's not, their brains are ready to learn language. And it makes it harder for the teacher, not for the child, because the teacher just simply has to understand how to integrate all of the strands together. We do it every day in our conversations, but you've got to be meta about it.
I know,
So, okay,
you know what,
get to work, Trina.
When I design a lesson, You know this because I've argued with you over it. When I design a lesson or an assessment or something like that with you, I have a teacher, a Head Start teacher in my head. And she was a Mexican immigrant, was raised in Texas. And she would say to me, she's like, I'm Tex-Mex, but I have no idea how to teach this language. Right. And so she was like, she would tell me, Trina, do this. This is what I need to be able to do this. And she was like my side, like, what's that called? Sitting shotgun with me, helping me know what it is that this teacher needed to be able to implement a language focused lesson. So I always have her in mind when I'm doing those things. I know we're just at time, but I think Jacqueline had a comment and I really want to hear it.
Sorry, I was just thinking about the whole concept, and I think maybe I missed a lot of this, but of using context and then using that subset of decontextualize things to teach things within that, like the vocabulary, the language structure, just the comprehension piece by piece, and just being able to do that as you learn more almost automatically when you're working in context.
I love it. Yeah. And it's always in context. You're not teaching vocabulary in isolation. It's always in the context of a meaningful communication context, which drives, like Naomi mentioned, this idea of the entry to it, like the motivation. Why are you doing this? If you make it meaningful communication, then no one's bored. If you make it a story about themselves, they're not bored anymore. You don't have to worry about self-regulation. Nobody is bored when they're telling their own story. Right? So you can embed meaningful things into your context, and then you take care of the self-regulation. I may have oversimplified things there, but that's a general idea.
Oh no, I just have too many stories about those kinds of things where kids would use these incredibly huge words and complex structures because they could talk about themselves if they did it. They just love that. So,
or something that they love, like dinosaurs. The language gets real complex because they're interested. So, yeah. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I know we're out of time. That was a lot of fun. We could go forever, and it goes so fast, and we're not done. We haven't solved anything exclusively yet, but we know that Trina has a lot of work to do now. So
whatever. This isn't on me. I need shotgun riders, guys.
Okay.
I need shotgun riders.
I'm with you.
I do want to just say that I know Doug and I did most of the talking here, right? But we really, really, truly enjoy hearing what's happening out there. Like, we know something is going on in California. Some of you are SLPs and have teachers that you're trying to support, right? And you're coming up against those obstacles. We need to hear those things, right? We're not in the schools anymore. Doug was an SLP in California, and I was a school psychologist in New York in the early 2000s. And then we became researchers to solve the problems that we were running across. But we're going as fast as we can, but we need more help. We need the community, right? We need to understand the landscape that's contemporary, since it's been 15 years since we've been in the schools. So thank you for having these conversations with us. Watch out for a summary with some links to some articles that kind of, that we touched on. We might not have referenced them properly as we were going, but we like to share those with you. And join us again. Email us if you ever want to join research, or tell us what we need to be working on.
Yes, come play with us, partner with us. Thank you so much.
I just threw in the chat one more time. Make sure if you want a certificate of attendance to fill out the link that I put in the chat, and be looking out for the email with the recording and summary that we'll be sending out by the end of the week. Thanks, everyone.
Sounds great.
This was awesome. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks for your comments too. Appreciate that.
Aoife, thank you. AOIFE is Aoife.
Aoife.
Yeah.
It's funny. I supervised a student with that name, but I could never, it was all distant. So I was like, oh, I can't remember.
My family is all IRA, so
oh,
I'm like, oh God. Trina. But you wouldn't know.
I wouldn't know. I've only seen it written.
You have to meet someone, and Christy and I were talking about that. Like you have to meet someone. So Aoife is
It's the name,
AOIFE. Like Sinead O'Connor, like people don't know how
Nate
that's.
Dorsha
Or
how do you-
Siobhan is another
Dorsha?
one.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Well,
Gosh,
thank
damn
you.
Irish spellings.
Learning
This
learning
Gaelic
something
crap.
today. Thank
This
you.
was great. This was really great. So thank you both. I really appreciated you also moderating the chat and bringing that in, so people who don't read the chat later in the recordings, Christy, and I really appreciate that.
Well, we need
Yeah,
to
you
do this
made
more
my
often.
job
It's so
very
much
easy.
Yeah.
fun. Sorry. Yeah. Oh man. I remember just getting completely roasted on Facebook when I even slightly mentioned